Hello English 213, welcome to the final week of the class. Congratulations, as I said in my announcement, for making it this far. I know it hasn't been easy. Many of you do not have, the right side of your brain functioning as well as the left side of your brain. So the right side is all about imagination and creativity. That's where I do well. I don't do so great on the left-hand side, the math, logic side, if you can tell. But anyways, you've made it this far, you've experimented with language, you've played with characters, you've done poetry, you've done fiction, and now we're at the end of the course, and we're going to put everything together in your final writing portfolio. So I just want to take a brief moment to talk to you about that, because sometimes it's easier when I talk it through and then just reading it from the guide sheet. So there's two places where the guide sheet exists currently. There is a folder called Final Writing Portfolio under Learning Modules. You have a guide sheet that tells you what needs to be included and how to format it. You also have a sample of the portfolio there. I just pieced things together. It's not a real student sample. It just kind of shows you how to lay the entire document out. So make sure you look at both documents when you're preparing your final writing portfolio. The purpose of the final writing portfolio is to put your best versions of your work in one place. So that means your best versions of materials from the poetry unit and your best materials from the fiction unit. And to put it all together into one portfolio, one document you'll be submitting. So the guide sheet goes over that the document needs to have a cover page, and all of the poetry, when it's in its final version, should be single spaced. Okay, so no more double spacing your poetry. It should all be in the same font, Times New Roman. Your reflection pieces and your stories can still be double spaced, so anything that's longer than the poem. Your writing exercises can be in single or double. I'm not overly concerned about that. Okay, everything should be on its own individual page. Stories, obviously, or poems that run more than one page can be on consecutive pages, but everything should start on its own page with a heading. And then each piece, the poetry unit, has your 4 out of 5 poems that you're revising. You don't need all 5. You can include all 5, but I need to see the revised work of 4 poems. Then you are going to show me your 2 writing exercises from that unit. And I've asked you to revise your writing exercises, okay? So the metaphor and then the point of view writing exercises that we did right on the discussion board, you're going to give me your best versions of those. So if I gave you pointers on how to improve your metaphors or pointers on how to improve your point of view writing exercises, make sure you make those changes and include them in the portfolio. The last piece is the reflection piece, where you answer those reflective questions. And I say about 1.5 pages double space for that. That gives me some idea of how you felt about your poetry, about how you felt about your peer work, and about how you felt about some of the poetry we read from the anthologies. The fiction unit goes very similarly. You're going to take one story and revise it, your best favorite one that you thought you did well on, that you want to make look good for your portfolio. And then the 2 writing exercises we did in the fiction unit was the character development exercise and the 250 word story. So your best versions of those need to go in as well. 1 story, 2 writing exercises, and then similarly that reflective piece that talks about how you developed your stories, your peer work, and then finally things you read in class that you enjoyed or were impacted by or influenced by. Okay, so I think when you look at the sample, it will make sense to you, but make sure that you're asking me questions as you go. Remember, it's all one document, all Times New Roman 12 font, and it breaks down into those 3 sections: the poetry and or stories, the writing exercises, and then the reflection for both units. Now your question is, how the heck do I revise this? How do I put my best version in? If you met with me on phone conferences for poetry, that makes total sense to you probably. We did a lot of talking about how to punctuate, how to create the most fresh language in the poems, how to lose the cliches, how to organize the poem. So hopefully you can take those notes. If you weren't able to talk to me in a phone conference about your poetry, the things to really look for, and I talked a lot about this in our phone conferences. Poetry is all about saying things that we've said a long time, things about love, things about death, things about relationships, and saying them in a new way. So the number one thing I'm looking for is a freshness of language. That's what that metaphors exercise was about. Let's not say love in the same way we've always said love, right? How can we play with language and make it more playful? The other thing I'm looking for is sort of how well you did the exercise. So if it was the point of view exercise, poem 3 and 4 look different from each other. If it was the metaphor exercise, that really you have some fresh metaphors in there. If it was the imitation exercise, that your poem really did imitate the original well. If it was the form poem, that really did follow a form, right? Things to look for when you're looking at your own poetry are things like punctuation. Did you organize the poem into stanzas? You know, poems should have a balance to them. So you might have a 12-line poem and like there's 3 lines in the first stanza and 4 in the second. Try to find your own pattern in the poem and make sure that the poem does follow some pattern. All poems should, even free-form poems. So things to look for: freshness of language, that you've formatted it correctly, it's single space, Times New Roman, that you're looking at your punctuation and that it's making sense to you, that the poem has some type of organization, that maybe the stanzas are all set up into 3 or 4 lines, and then that carries all the way through. What else with poetry? That they have an original, each poem has an original title. And then again, just remembering what the exercise was about and making sure you maximized the exercise. Take a look at what your peers had to say about your poems as well, because they do offer a nice perspective on them. If you'd like me to read through any of your poetry, please let me know. And if you'd still like to have a phone conversation with me, I'm available all week. For fiction revisions really are, from what I can tell from your writing so far, you've got to do a mechanics edit. Obviously, the stories should read mechanically correct, right? Which is just punctuation, spelling, grammar. Make sure somebody reads your stories over for those. Don't lose points on mechanics, right? Then for elements, the things that I really look for in story are characters, right? That we have physical descriptions of characters, that we get some sense of who the people are in your story. That's why we did those character sketches, so that we could, even if the character never says out loud what their greatest fear is, knowing that about your character helps your character act that way, right? So I'm going to be looking for that I've gotten a good sense of your character, how they look, how they behave, what they would usually say out loud, and that their dialogue and their actions match that, okay? So take a peek at your characters. The other thing that stories almost always lack are physical details of the setting, right? You have to imagine that we do not know what anyone looks like. We don't know what the space looks like. We don't know how it smells, sounds. We don't know what the feel of things are. You're creating all of that for us in a story, right? So physical details are really important. Think about, I'm going to use my senses, right? I'm going to place my reader right here in the story, and I'm going to tell them what things smell, sound, feel, taste like, right? So physical details are really important. I look at dialogue when I look at revisions. So dialogue is the way your characters are interacting and what they're saying to each other. Dialogue should do one of 2 things. One, it should move the story forward. So whatever the person's saying out loud, it's essential to the moving the story forward, or it's revealing something about the person's character or personality, right? So making sure your dialogue is essential, and that you're not just using dialogue to take up space, right? And the very last thing is, every story just has to follow a basic structure of rising tension, hitting a moment of tension, and then resolution. we're looking for that arc in the story. So if you can't find that moment of highest tension, then you haven't gotten there yet in your story. And you need to find it and make sure the story reaches that high level and then resolves. So character, setting, dialogue, and what was the last thing? Just conflict resolution are things to really concentrate on when revising your story. As I said before, I will be taping feedback for all of you on both your stories. That should be available to you by 3 p.m. on Wednesday. Okay, so make sure you look at my video where I tell you some pointers for your own individual story. Okay, that will be on the forum called Story Feedback. You'll have a link to a video where I talk through your story. But if you want further pointers, individual pointers, feel free. We can set up time to chat real quick before Sunday comes. Okay, so this entire portfolio with your most revised, best versions of your work is due Sunday by midnight. I cannot accept any late portfolios because grades are literally due 24 hours after that. So I've got a lot of reading to do, and I want to make sure that you get full credit for the class. All right, so those are some of the pointers on the portfolios. I hope that was helpful, and please feel free to be in touch with me this week if you have anything else you'd like to discuss. Okay? Have a great evening. I'll talk to you all soon.